Hello and welcome to the Bravo Outsider Podcast. I am your host, Craig Midwinter, joined as always by Dylan Ferguson. And today we are talking about the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, Season 6, Episode 2. Dylan, give us a summary of what happened on this episode.
All right. This is a pretty solid, episode 2. I feel like we're kind of getting the teams sorted out. So I guess we start off with the coda of the RV trip, the camping trip. The next morning, they kind of hash a few things out over a steak breakfast. And then they kind of break out into separate camps to kind of delineate the sides. I guess the first break off we have is Heather meeting with Lisa to give her the lowdown and squeal about everything that was said about her. Then on the slopes, Whitney and Bronwyn hit the slopes to kind of solidify their alliance a little bit. Then we have kind of a warm-up showdown between Heather and Bronwyn over lunch, which leads us into our climax, which is kind of socialite gathering in some rich person's house where we get Bronwyn and Lisa as the episode's title fight.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this episode. Like you said, solid episode 2. There was a lot here going on. What is one word that kind of captures this episode, do you think?
Talky. This is a very verbal episode for me. I thought there's just a lot of verbal sparring, and I get that you could feel like, oh, it's not like every episode, but I feel like more than usual, this was more really based around fast talking patter conversations and a lot of word games, a lot of word salad, some might say, that I thought this was a very verbal episode. That sounds kind of weird.
Yeah, that's a good one. For me, it was suspense. I thought that there was really great suspense that was created throughout this in a lot of different ways. Like, for one, very early on, you mentioned that scene that we got between Heather and Lisa. Heather kind of gets Lisa all riled up, and we're just waiting for her to kind of explode at the end of that. I thought that the suspense there was great, but also within a scene, I thought there was really good use of suspense. And this is something I'm going to talk about when I talk about my favorite beat within this episode, but there's great use of just empty pauses within this episode and us waiting to see what is going to happen between two people, whether that is Heather and Bronwyn in their sit down, or whether that is between Mary and her son. I just really liked how they built suspense in various scales within this episode. I thought it was really effective for me.
Interesting.
In terms of your favorite scenes, is there something that stood out to you in particularly with regards to the narrative?
There's a lot of ones that I liked. I think maybe my favorite was the dinner between Heather and Bronwyn. I thought that was really good. Just to follow up on my idea that this was a very verbal episode, I think those are the two best talkers in the show. I think they're both pretty intelligent women who know how to speak kind of quickly and off the cuff, and know how to kind of spin the dialogue on the spot without without resorting to argumentation or or just pure emotion or anger or cliche even. They both are very quick on their feet when it comes to talking, and I think Heather has been used to a long time being the most kind of verbally adept member of this crew, and I think that she's in a way met her match in Bronwyn, who is also a very, very good talker and very quick on her feet when it comes to conversations. So I really liked that scene because it kind of felt like a bit of a sparring match between two opponents sizing each other up, who were both, in this case, I'm really eager to hear what your examples are of the uses of silences, because I think that's a great point. But I think this is a scene where what's remarkable is the lack of silence. Each woman is jumping on the other person's phrase immediately with an immediate response. They do not let anything linger in that conversation, and that's why it really felt like a kung fu sparring match to me. Very there's a parry and thrust following every phrase.
Yeah, totally. And I think that Like I said, silence is really effectively used here. And it happens at the very beginning when they first sit down and they're kind of sizing each other up without saying anything. No one
Yeah.
wants to kind of say the first word. And then they're like, okay, maybe we should just order first before we get into this. And then, like you said, when the scene progresses, we have them talking on top of each other. And it is such a different like dynamic than what we got at the beginning where they're very hesitant to talk. It
Hmm.
really feels like a release of the tension that was created at the beginning of that scene. And I think that that is, one way that this scene is particularly effective.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. They build up to it a bit.
I think my favorite scene in terms of the narrative of this was the lunch that Heather had with Lisa, because I really enjoyed how that was really setting up the tension for the big payoff at the end, the big fight at the party. We kind of predicted last episode when we were talking about the campfire discussion and all the dialogue about Lisa that Heather was going to immediately run and tell Lisa, and that's exactly what
And
happened.
boy,
We got
did
that
she.
like, yeah, right out of the gates. The
Yeah.
like first thing that we see within this episode is her doing that. The first thing she says is like just laying it all out there for Lisa, and I thought it was very effective at being like, okay, we've loaded the Lisa Barlow gun and we are
Yeah.
like ready and waiting for it to fire. So that was my favorite in terms of like the narrative arc of this episode.
Yeah.
How about in terms of like how this was put together? Do you have a favorite like shot or sequence or beat here?
Probably my favorite scene aesthetically was the first conversation the morning after camping, where they're all just kind of sitting around the campfire. I like that. I like moments that kind of reinforce the idea that they are friends who can share things with each other. And especially starting the episode off with that gives us kind of a bit of a baseline before it kind of fragments into team building and the various arts of war that they engage in, separating each other, forming camps and stuff. To have them sitting around a campfire in such like a recognizably kind of cozy atmosphere, little crackling fire in the middle, kind of keeping them warm. We can tell that it's cold out, and that they need that kind of shared communal space to get a bit of warmth against the cold background. We see kind of out of focus, tree branches, looks a little snowy and stuff. Everybody's dressed in atrocious, bizarre things. I think Bronwyn's wearing a blanket with her face on it, but that's an aside. That that scene I thought was well done because that does establish the baseline of kind of seeking warmth in each other. Everything's kind of colored by a little bit of that crackling air from the fires often between the camera and the performers. You don't necessarily see the fire, but you see some smoke and you see the air crackling with the heat coming off of it. A lot of medium shots, a lot of shots of like 2 or 3 people together. So it's a different vibe from the dinners where you get a lot of close-ups. It's my face in your face. This feels more communal. There's more kind of a shared warmth to it. They talk about motherhood. They open up a little bit, and I feel like it's a great idea to start an episode off like that, especially when you're going to finish the episode with the party scene where it's going to be very loud and chaotic and there's a lot of people, but it feels like very kind of competitive, aggressive, chaotic. So to build from a sort of communal warmth aesthetic and then to bring that through the course of the episode to the kind of chaos of society at large is a great construction device to just kind of string the episode together. So I like that as the opening salvo.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great analysis of that scene. I had a different scene that stood out to me, and I think one of the things that really tugged on me emotionally was seeing this scene between Mary and her son Robert Jr. We talked last season a lot about this dynamic and how the visual language surrounding this dynamic was really strong. Like one thing that stands out to me is the scene from last episode where we see Robert Jr. and his wife kind of walking up the stairs while Mary is trying to desperately like connect with him as he's going up, like she's watching a balloon float away. We didn't have that same sort of blocking, like that same kind of cinematic construction here. It uses a much more raw presentation, like borrowing the language of documentary quite strongly in this. And the use of silence and giving space to every single line here, I thought was really impactful. Like every time someone said something, we're like holding our breath, waiting to see what the next person is going to say. And it really added to the tension that they feel. And, wondering whether or not Robert is going to be honest or dishonest and what he is going to say. And I think that when he eventually kind of trickle truths what he's alluding to about the vices that he is, finding comfort in after feeling this isolation, I thought that was a really strong, like, emotional payoff to this tension that we get, because Mary is really looking to connect with her son and get like some honesty from him, even if it isn't like the words that she wants to hear. Like, she really wants him to be better, but the fact that she's able to kind of get through that haze that he is clearly in and get some truth, I think was, I don't know, it really resonated with me. So I just really like how this was treated by the editors. I thought that the way that it ended, the slow dissolve to black and silence under the PSA slide, and then the super muted transition whoosh with like no music under the title card of them all holding their snowflakes. I just really thought that it was very expertly treated, and I really loved that whole sequence.
That's a great point about that scene, and that's kind of the flip side of what I was saying, that I like a lot of the kind of like talky verbal sparring stuff. This is a scene that like you mentioned gets a lot of weight from people not knowing what to say, from neither Robert Jr. nor Mary really knowing what to say in the moment. Though he does, even though he's like really struggling to communicate himself, he does like make a couple good points about when you stop doing drugs, one of the things that's hard is just losing routine. Like routine can be as strong as any kind of psychoactive ingredient in terms of being an addictive force in your life. And also, he doesn't hang out with his friends anymore because his friends do drugs. Like, those are like a kind of good points that even if he's struggling to communicate, and probably doesn't want to have that conversation, because what kid would in that environment. He still does manage to communicate a couple of good points, and Mary kind of wraps it up by spouting a couple cliches, I think. But the fact that they're cliches doesn't mean that they're not still the right things to say. That's the kind of trap with cliches. Sometimes you can get too caught up in trying to express things originally that you end up not communicating, when you can communicate it effectively just by saying that what is the right thing. So that was the kind of awkwardness of that scene is what gives it strength too, because it feels more real for that reason.
Yeah, totally. How about themes or devices? Is there anything else that stood out to you in terms of the construction of this episode?
And not really, beyond like just kind of the thematics implied with the kind of bookends scenes that I mentioned earlier, going from the campfire to the party, from the warmth of community to the chaos of like a broader society. That's mostly what I picked up on. Otherwise, it felt to me pretty structured in terms of like building up the dynamics that we're going to that we're going to be going forward with.
Yeah, I think that for me, there was a strong theme of identity within this episode. Like, that's kind of the core of this renewed conflict between Heather and Bronwyn. This little disagreement that they get into as a result of the conversation at the campfire. Mm-hmm. It all kind of surrounds their idea of like what it means to be a mother and how that fits in with their identity and their perspective. I thought that theme is carried on through the scene with Mary and her son in terms of how she approaches motherhood, and also how Robert Jr. sees being a drug user as part of his identity, and how he's struggling to find himself after trying to extract that. And also, like, Lisa is entirely motivated by her sense of identity and how she positions herself higher than everyone else. And we get that conversation between her and Heather where, you know, Lisa says, like, I've got a lot going on. Everyone knows that I do big things. And Heather trying to be like, you're not that different from everyone else. And Lisa affirming that, yes, she is. Her sense of, you know, like why this attack on her is so impactful and why she's so reactive to it is because it attacks her identity as being, you know, kind of an echelon above where everyone else on this cast is. And the fact that that is at risk is what is making her especially reactive here. So I really like how this was all just, this theme was kind of strung throughout.
Yeah. That's a great point. And a couple things I'd like to pick up on that. I did find it interesting that we get Bronwyn using the line, I don't know who I am if I'm not Gwen's mom, as like justifying why she kind of like came down on the side of like, no, I think I want to keep my kids in my house as long as possible. Whereas Heather's perspective seems to be like, I've had to fight to extract my identity from all these things around me, which were identifying me for me, you know, the church, and my family, were all like, were forcing an identity on me. And it's been her thing for years now to be like, I'm proud of myself for having extracted a true identity from that. And the main conflict with Bronwyn is Bronwyn's perspective is basically like, but this is where my identity comes from. Like that makes my identity. That is who I am. That's not something that's forcing me to not become myself. It's what it's allowing me to become myself. So I think that's an interesting debate over like what is a person's true identity. And also in terms of that discussion that Heather and Lisa had, I really admired Heather's kind of like eyes on the prize dedication to like what she was in that scene for, that she was able to like just kind of cringe through Lisa being like I'm not the same as you guys, okay, like yeah. As well as Lisa being like so nobody was defending me except for you. you know, and just like Lisa's being totally insulting there and just kind of dismissive of Heather, and Heather is like obviously like grated by it, but like just kind of sticks through it and avoids like getting into a conflict until she can finally get to the point where Lisa finally says like, wow, so it sounds like nobody was defending me except you. And she's like, yeah, okay, there, fine. I extracted the phrase I needed to extract from this conversation. I can get out of here.
So I want to get back to this like war of the words between Heather and Bronwyn. I'm curious whose side are you on here in terms of the fight between them at the campfire?
In terms of the campfire, I think in the scene that what we actually see in terms of what happens in the campfire, I'm more sympathetic to Heather's perspective. I think it came off as slightly dismissive from Bronwyn to come up with a rejoinder to her being like, oh, I've been able to become my true self by separating myself finally from all these things that were imposed on me. The fact that I was the only one who raised the kids. I think it felt a little bit insensitive in the moment for Bronwyn to be like, yeah, but I love my kids so much, I never want them to leave. I think the editors gave Bronwyn a good assist there, like that did a couple times this episode. Like the editors are definitely like giving Bronwyn a boost here, but they gave her a good assist by stitching in the confessionals where Bronwyn kind of fleshes out the idea and is like, right. I'm like, I think about this stuff too. I don't know who I am if I'm not Gwen's mom. But she doesn't say those things in the moment. She says those things in the confessional, and the editor stitch it in, which makes Bronwyn's perspective a lot more interesting and rich for the viewer, not for Heather, because that's the stitched in for us. So I think in terms of like what actually happens in the conversation around the campfire, it does seem a little impolite and misplaced of Bronwyn to kind of come in there and step on what Heather's saying.
Yeah,
I don't know. What do you think?
I fully agree. Like, I thought that it came across like so out of line for Bronwyn to be like, oh, actually, because I love my kids, unlike you, Heather. That's really how it came across to me.
Yeah, exactly.
So I can definitely understand where Heather is coming from and being like like upset about this whole thing. And I really like after Bronwyn gets a little bit of coaching from Whitney when she actually finally sits down to Heather, she's really trying hard to reframe her comments in this framing that we get assisted by the editors. And Heather is not biting. She holds her to it, and I really liked what Heather was doing here. I think that's one of the things that made that scene between Heather and Bronwyn so dynamic is they really had opposing goals there. Like Heather is looking for a fight with Bronwyn. She wants to come out of this being further away from her as possible, and Bronwyn is trying to get closer and trying to like mend things. And the fact that they both have kind of opposing goals in that scene is makes it really fascinating, because Bronwyn is looking to move forward and get past things and is willing to like give up whatever she needs to in order to get closer to Heather, and Heather is trying to find some sort of fulcrum for a conflict with her and look for any way that she can kind of cause a fight.
Mm-hmm. I think Bronwyn's also just kind of looking for like who's with her and who's against her in terms of her plan to go after Lisa. I think that's kind of her main motivation too, in both meeting up with Heather and with Whitney, is being like, when I go full force into Lisa, who's going to be on my wings, who's going to be on my flank, and who's going to be taking the opposite camp.
Yeah, how do you think she's like approaching this conflict with Lisa?
I think she's doing a good job. I think her head to head with Whitney was good. Like they clearly have common ground there. Whitney really wants that to happen, right? Like Whitney clearly wants the attacks against Lisa to go off, and she's stoked that Bronwyn's willing to take the lead in that. When Bronwyn's digging into Lisa at the party, Whitney's loving it. Like every shot we see of Whitney, she's got a huge grin on her face. She's drinking it up. She loves this shit, I think she did a pretty good job setting the stage for it. Kind of figuring out that kind of Angie and Whitney are kind of going to be her allies on this, and are going to kind of not going to be as eager to take the lead as she is, but she's like totally willing to be in the position where she takes the lead, feeling comfortable that there's a couple people that are there behind her. And I think she held her own very well when it came down to the shouting match at the party. So I think she did a good job. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I thought she had excellent performance in the fight against Lisa at the party. I think that was great. I think it was pretty dominating in terms of the fight there. The one thing in terms of her approach on this that I find a little bit clumsy is I think she revealed to Whitney that she has a very deep understanding of these court cases. Like she has read all the documents. I think she didn't necessarily mean to reveal that. And I think it's probably not going to be like a fatal error here, because Whitney is pretty firmly entrenched on her side. But I think giving up that she has looked into this that deeply and is like that obsessed with this in the wrong hands could potentially be a bad thing. Like if for some reason throughout this season, Whitney sees some strategic value in flipping sides and being on Lisa's side, and she's well positioned for a takedown of Bronwyn on this specifically, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Also because she's not being totally upfront about it either. Like when people like confront her about like, oh, you seem to know a lot about it, she's gone back a couple times to the line. It was in the newspaper, like it was in the Salt Lake Tribune. And then she's like, and so then on the third filing on page 5, I cite paragraph 3. Like, no, that was not in the newspaper, girl. You were digging through the files.
Yeah, totally. And I like the treatment of this as well, because Heather says to Lisa that Bronwyn is obsessed with this and has like brought out all these facts about it. And in terms of the story that we had up until that point, at least, it had seemed like Bronwyn's level of knowledge on this was, just what you would pick up on a newspaper. So it seemed like this was hyperbole coming from Heather. But then when we get the next scene between Whitney and Bronwyn, we see that, oh no, like she actually is like really deep in the trenches on this. So I kind of liked how that information was presented to us as viewers.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's talk about quotes. Was there a quote that stood out to you?
Even though I've said that I really like the verbal sparring in this episode, I didn't find a lot of quotes that really jumped out at me. Aside from "I have a question and a pause about you, gout dick sucker," from Lisa. Obviously, you can't just avoid talking about gout dick sucker. That's funny.
So Heather's confessional about that right after made it sound like that's like a thing that people like. I've never heard this insult before. Have you?
No, of course I haven't. I don't think anybody's ever said those words before Lisa Barlow just said them.
Well, Heather has a confessional where she's like, oh, I haven't heard gout dick since the Civil War or something like that. And I don't know what she's referring to in that.
I read that just as she was referring to the idea that you associate gout as being something that people got in like the 18th and 19th centuries. And like, you don't hear about people getting gout too much these days. But that's where I kind of saw that coming from. This like tuberculosis or something. Like it feels like an old timey kind of insult, but Todd is very old, so he might have contracted it in the Civil War. I'm not sure. Yeah. I'm just curious where that came from on Lisa's end. Like, is that supposed to be her way of saying like your husband is old and fat and in poor health? Is that like the implication of him having a gout?
Yeah,
dick?
I guess so. It's amazing either way. That's fantastic insult.
Yeah. What about you? What quote did you note down?
Yeah, one quote that stood out to me was like right off the beginning when Meredith in a confessional says something. We're coming out of that found footage intro that we get, and it ends with
Blair Witch Project will never die, by the way.
It ends with Meredith saying they're not going to let us die. That's too much of a liability for the network. And I thought it was really interesting that because they very rarely break the kayfabe of this. And so for them to build up at the end of last episode and the beginning of this episode, this like sense of danger, and for them to immediately like shatter that illusion, I thought was really interesting. And it kind of fits in terms with the treatment of this, because the season so far up until that point had been this kind of like fantasy getaway type treatment. Like we got that like paranormal horror. It seems almost otherworldly, and then this episode is a crash back to reality. So I don't know. I just kind of like that quote, kind of like shattering the season so far and being like, okay, we're back to reality.
Yeah, I like how campy the whole like Blair Witch Project tribute was, and I like how they just kind of shrug it off as like, yeah, it's kind of a dumb joke. Yeah, maybe it landed, maybe it didn't. We're just having fun here, like they don't bother to like try to convince the audience like, oh, they actually got lost in the woods. They're like, nah, we're just goofing around.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk strategy here in terms of the moves that were made here. Who do you think is climbing and who do you think is falling in terms of the social structures?
I'm going to reiterate that I thought it was a strong episode for Braun, for LeBronwyn, who's really who's becoming a power player. I thought she played it well. I'll reiterate. I thought she played it well. Like we mentioned, I'm not saying it's without missteps, but I thought it was I thought she consolidated her powers well before going into the fight, and then handled herself very well in the title fight at the end. I think, and both in her head-to-head with Heather and in her confrontation with Lisa, in both cases, the other woman kind of pulled the ripcord and ended it before she did. And so you could dispute who, quote, won, unquote, the fights, but I think in both cases she kind of looked like the last person standing and looked like she was consolidating her strength rather than growing weaker throughout.
Yeah, and how about who's losing? Who's losing ground?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't want to kind of diagnose whether Lisa is actually losing or not, even though I said that I thought like Bronwyn kind of won the fight. I feel like that'd be like really premature to say at this point, especially since, Heather, sucking her dick shows that like she still has like a lot of strength in the group. If anything, I would say that maybe Heather looks a little weaker after this too, because she is like kind of coming off as so desperate for Lisa's approval without really strengthening her bonds with anyone else necessarily. I'm not sure like what her path forward looks like. If it's not completely yoked to one other person, Lisa, I don't see what other new alliances she's working on that will make her position stronger independently of Lisa. So I'm maybe a little concerned about her standing going forward as a result of the events in this episode.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I feel like Heather definitely gained a lot of ground with Lisa, but her position is so closely tied to Lisa's position now, just because she is firmly entrenched on that side. So it might be a lateral move just because of how unsturdy Lisa's position is. I think the call of Bronwyn being the biggest gainer here is probably a good one. I think, she knows who's on her side now. She's got a strong relationship with Whitney. I think Whitney has a rising position as well, just by the nature of that position. She's got an attack dog on her side now in Bronwyn. So I think that she is in a position that is growing. I am very curious to see what Meredith does here, because that could even out the kind of balance of power. Right now, it is looking like there's a lot of people against Lisa, just because Meredith is so inactive here. But if she, decides that she's going to align closely with Lisa and continue to bolster that side, I think this looks a lot more like a fair fight. So I'm curious what happens with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see which way Meredith breaks, because even when Lisa's asking Heather for the lowdown on how things went, she's like, and Meredith? And Heather's like, Meredith was being Meredith.
Yeah.
Just that just kind of sums up her position so far, as he just kind of seems to be hanging back and isn't really willing to take a position yet. It'll be interesting to see if that changes.
And when Lisa talks to her directly at the party, she doesn't really give Lisa a lot. She kind of gestures to being on her side, but she doesn't really give her anything. And I think that her position is undermined by Brittany, who comes in and is like, oh yeah, Angie compared you to Jen Shaw. Like, that's like one of the first things that she says. Yeah. She's the one that gives Lisa that huge bombshell. I don't know what Heather was thinking, not giving that information to
She did, Lisa. I think, didn't she? Didn't she? Heather mentioned that over their dinner? I think she did.
I don't think so. I don't remember her saying that. I thought that Brittany was the first one that delivered that.
I feel like we'll have to roll the tape here, but I do feel like Brittany mentioned it in her lunch with Lisa, though it didn't necessarily come off as a bombshell in the moment. But I thought she did say that, like, somebody compared you to Jen Shaw, and maybe even named Angie specifically. I'm not sure. We'll have to check the tape on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that it wasn't, but leave a comment, let us know. There's no other way that we'll ever know.
Yeah. It's live theater, and there's no way to check afterwards.
But I thought that Brittany's decision to immediately, give all the information that she had to Lisa was actually a really good one for her. Even if there wasn't a lot of thought put into it, I think that her just being like, here's the information, I'm being like fully transparent. She's corroborating what Heather has told her. She is clearly giving the big in pieces of information that she has. And I thought her deciding to kind of drop that big bomb on Lisa and present her with that information was really, really smart.
Yeah. And presumably the editors cut out like the other 7 sentences she said, which were all about Jared being at the same event as her.
Oh man, that little cutaway that we got to the husbands talking and Jared refusing to say that he's madly in love with, with Brittany.
2 things about that. First of all, why are all the guys in the hallway like standing with their backs against the wall like it's a police lineup? And and then also like, what is that? They're grilling him like, so do you love her? Yeah. Are you like madly in love with her? Yeah, I guess. And then I think John's like, oh, yeah, okay, but are you madly in love with her? Like, what are you, 6? Like, what is this? Like, I get what they're doing. They're trying to like show him voice some doubt about the relationship, but it just seems so silly.
And he does, like, he's not fully into this. They can tell, they can smell the blood in the water that he's just kind of like, oh, I don't want to like come across like I'm super into her. I really like this in terms of the character that they've been building for Seth across Bravo this year. And I guess if you watch Next Gen NYC, Seth is like in everyone's business, and I really like that that's continued here, just like his stream. Okay, let's get into highlights. Any highlights that we haven't discussed?
I want to shout out to the one line in the court document that we see, which is Barlow did not dispute the debt, but rather simply replied with a palm face emoji and a one-word response: overwhelmed. That's a great line to show up in a court document about Lisa Barlow.
Yeah, I think we covered most of what I wanted to discuss. Who are your stars here?
Yeah, so first star has got to be LeBron win until she starts missing her shots. That's what I'm going to keep calling her. It was a great episode for her. I think just to come back to my favorite scene one more time, I just think that if you go into kind of a verbal sparring match with a kind of I'm not mad, are you tone with like Heather, you got to bring your A game because she's really good at that. And I think she just really came out on top there. And that's not an easy thing to do in that situation. Like, I think we end up with Heather saying,
especially for someone who didn't go to college or law school.
There you go. And because, Heather has that kind of like former debate kid energy to her. I think she she likes those kind of turning the conversation around without like making it look like you're trying to reframing it, without coming off as like super angry and being like kind of I'm the aggrieved but reasonable person here. And like Bronwyn meets her on that same level and kind of bests her. Like when Heather gets a little flustered and she says like, you're kind of word salading it a bit. She's directly referencing the fact that is kind of like a verbal game. Like they are playing with their words, but also by saying that phrase, that's not a very clear thing to say. Like she is like seemingly accusing Bronwyn of being unclear with her words by using expression, which is in itself the most unclear thing anybody has said so far from what we've seen. So I thought that was a great kind of misstep in that kind of like little verbal kung fu match that showed that Bronwyn was getting the upper hand, which immediately after that, she goes into like, I just wanted to be your friend and let's cheers to that. Like she pulls the ripcord, like Heather's like, we'll end this here. And that felt like a big victory for Bronwyn. So yeah, she's got to be the first star. But I will give second star to Heather, I think, because, I still do like seeing her. I like seeing her like frantic her frantic verbalizing and her constant attempts to explain her position, defend her position in every situation, always be trying to be biographizing, telling her life story, and her life story isn't without interest either. Like I think this is a lot of I think one of the reasons why she's so compelling for me is because she's like both kind of annoyingly phony, but also like kind of sincere and relatable at the same time. Like she's operating on both those levels.
Oh yeah.
And I thought it was another like just really fun, interesting episode for her. So I'll slip her in second star. And third star, there's a lot of candidates here. I mean, I could definitely give it to Mary for having that one scene which kind of stood out from being on a different register from everything else. Could definitely give it to Whitney, who low-key had a really good episode. But I think I got to go with Lisa. I mean, she had the line of the match with Gout Dick Sucker. She showed up for that lunch with Heather wearing what seemed to be a comically oversized overcoat. Just the kind of she was dressed the way the women are dressed in 90s anime.
Are Ben and Blake remaking Dick Tracy?
That's what the meeting was about. She was a lot of fun. She was a lot of fun, and I'll give Lisa the third star. Let's do that.
Yeah, I think that I have very similar stars. I think my number one star is going to be Bronwyn for all the reasons you mentioned. I think that last scene alone, she was excellent. I think just, you know, she forced Lisa into like going low and like lobbing insults and calling her a goat dick sucker.
Yeah, she called her a pig too. Like that's like you said, that's a sign of Bronwyn's victory, where Lisa just like starts like shouting mean things. Like,
yeah, totally. And she was even able to kind of swat those away and continue on the attack, being like, you know what, I like sucking dick. I'm unfazed by that allegation. I thought was really good. And her just like going in for the kill with nobody else here borrowed money behind their husband's back except you, bitch, was just like such a great like capstone line on that. So yeah, I think that she's number one here. I am loving seeing her on the attack. And this comes from when we talked last episode, we were talking about her coming in with a lot of ground to make up. I think that we've got a very compelling narrative and no one cares about this necklace anymore. So I think that this was like a huge win for Bronwyn on this episode. So she's number one. I think for me, number two is going to be Lisa or Gout Dick Tracy. I think that, you know, we missed her in the last episode. We saw, you know, she was present without being present. And now we've got her, that the tension that we got from her being introduced at the beginning and us seeing Heather light the fuse and then seeing the explosion at the end. That was super compelling to me. And number three is going to be Heather, because like you said, she was part of the dynamic between Lisa and Bronwyn. She's got her own independent dynamic with Bronwyn. But yeah, honorable mention to Mary, because that scene between her and her son, I thought was really compelling. And like you said, Lisa or Whitney low-key had a good episode too. I think that her hitching onto Bronwyn as a key ally is going to be really good for her.
Plus hitting some sick moves on the slopes.
Yeah, we saw her do like a 360 or something like that. That's great.
Also, quickly, I just wanted to point out that I found it really entertaining that when we see a shot of Mary's like, you know, makeup table and her dresser top, there seems to be like a framed image of a Life magazine special edition about Jesus. I thought that was. Did you catch that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, she seems to have framed the cover of like a Life magazine, like special issue about Jesus Christ, which seems like a really funny way to be religious. You know, like that's the way like Dean Martin fans act. Like, oh, I'll get that Life magazine special issue about the life of Dean Martin. Just an odd piece of religious art to have.
That's really good. Yeah, I think that about does it for this week. We are back next week. We're going to continue our discussion about Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, but we want to hear from you. Leave us a comment on either Spotify or YouTube, wherever you are watching or listening to this, and we'll talk about what you have to say. So let us know where you stand on Bronwyn versus Lisa. Dylan, do you want to let people know where they can find you?
Yeah, you could find some of my writings about movies on Substack. Just look for my name, Dylan Ferguson.
I'm Craig Midwinter. I am manning our Instagram and TikTok accounts, so you can follow us at Bravo Outsider on either of those platforms. Subscribe on YouTube, and until next week, keep on wifing.